Welcome, audience. I hope you enjoyed your screening of City So Real. I know that I did. So hello, my name is Viniyanka Prasad. I am the executive director of the nonprofit The Word. We are a literary arts organization that is focused on cultural equity. My other hat is that I'm also a criminal defense attorney. I spent many years out in the Chicagoland area, and this was definitely a watch for me. And I want to introduce you to our two guests today who are going to talk to you a little bit more about making this film. So we have with us Steve James, the two-time Academy Award nominated director. His 1994 work, Hoop Dreams, earned him the Directors Guild of America Award. In 2016, his film Abacus, Small Enough to Jail, won Best Political Documentary at the Critics' Choice Awards. And there are too many to include, but just a couple of other notable credits include the Emmy Award-winning The Interrupters and the acclaimed Starz docuseries, America to Me. We also have Zach Piper, who is an Emmy and PGA Award-winning documentary filmmaker who has made films for nearly 2 decades. This marks his 4th collaboration as producer with Steve James, after Piper produced James' Life Itself and co-produced The Interrupters and At the Death House Door. Welcome, Steve and James. So good to be here with you.
Great to be here.
Great to be here, yes.
Well, we just have a few minutes here, so I'm going to dive right in. And I want to talk about actually one of my favorite scenes from the series, which was the scene in the first session where we have the guys in the barbershop talking. And I thought that was just an incredible scene in that it was an inside conversation. To me, when I saw that, it made me stop and I thought, wow, this is really, they're just having a conversation it's within the community. And that's not the kind of thing that, in our political speeches that we usually get to see. So I wondered if you could give us a little bit of background about how that unfolded, and just kind of how did we end up there? That was great.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and it's one of our favorite scenes as well. So the barber who had been killed by the cops, Harith Augustus, which we get into a little bit prior to that scene coming along. He used to work at that barbershop. And so we, after all of the kind of drama of what happened to Harith had kind of passed, if you will, a little bit, we decided we wanted to go back to that barbershop. And our initial impulse for going there was to learn more about Harith and who he was as a barber there among the people that frequent the shop and worked with him. And when we got there and filmed, we certainly were getting that, and it was okay. But then this guy from the post office wandered in who had never been in that barbershop, and then the real conversation happened. And I think that you're right. It was a very passionate conversation, and I think there's no way we would have probably gotten to that place had that particular day one of our DPs, Kevin Shaw, who's African-American, and Bailey, who's one of our sound people who's African-American, were the crew. I was there, but I think it made a big difference that we had such a diverse team in the field in these kinds of moments. And I think it sort of signaled to the guys in the shop that it's okay to have a real conversation, not a conversation that they think maybe I, as a white filmmaker in that shop for the first time, might want to hear. And so I think it blew us away it just blew us away as the passion of these guys and the level of engagement with the community, with Chicago. I think we were constantly heartened by that.
I'm glad that you brought up some of that, actually, because that is something that struck me as I was watching this film, knowing that you and Zach were behind it, and just thinking about the makeup of Chicago and who is represented in the film and how they're represented. And kind of one of the things, to follow up on that is that conversation, you put in there and there's no exposition to it. There's a lot that's discussed in there that I don't think necessarily audiences are familiar with, but you didn't explain, and I loved that. And I
Good.
wondered what you wanted the audience to do with that. What was your thought process there?
Do you want to jump on that one, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea was sort of what you touched on in the last question, which is to give, you know, an insight, maybe something, you know, a more nuanced conversation, or you know, to bear witness to something that maybe, you know, is not represented, conversations that aren't represented, you know, in media. I think that's definitely part of the idea of including that scene.
Yeah, and you know, I just remember being there. I was really struck by, you know, here are these African American guys having a very passionate, incredible conversation about privilege as it relates to them as Black people. And you know, the conversation that's happening right now in America and around the world, and it's long overdue, is about white privilege. But these guys were talking about the sort of gradations of privilege that they feel within their own community. And you know, I'm sitting there listening to this, you know, I'm watching this unfold, and near the end of the conversation, I said to all the guys, it's not in this thing, I said, guys, thank you for this. I just want to say that to me, all of you guys are kind of amazing as to what you have overcome and what you've done, because they were, you know what I mean? And they all stopped, which was unusual, and they went, oh, thanks. And so it was kind of a sweet moment. But you know, that scene prompted us to then want to go to a different kind of barbershop. To go to a white barbershop in Bridgeport, which is a more diverse community, but historically has been a very much a white working class community. And so, you know, in the series, we go right to the Bridgeport barbershop, and you get a very different kind of experience of what those guys talk about and what they do.
That's one of the greatest parts of this, the way that you really found these different communities and managed to include so many different voices in this. And I think what's really interesting, I think for me as a Chicagoan, is that in each one of those conversations, it does sort of come out this feel of Chicago. And it's interesting because a lot of what is happening on the ground there is, you know, it does mirror what's happening on the national stage as well. But there does seem to be this very sort of Chicago approach. And I was thinking, it seems like every city sort of has its own sort of brand of ennui about how all of this goes down. And I wondered if there was any conversation that really struck you as being very Chicago, that really helped you kind of get that feel of the city that you were portraying.
Well, I'll say for me that in some ways, the kind of the microcosm of Chicago, both politically and otherwise, was the Board of Elections.
Definitely.
You know, we knew about that process, and Zach knew more about it than I did, but I'll speak for myself. I had no idea at the level of nuance and sophistication and vitriol and gamesmanship that goes into that process. And you know, as one person says in the series, in Chicago, politics is a blood sport, and you sort of see it on display there. But you also see, I feel like, I hope that you also see this kind of passion. That, I mean, the fact that 14 people made the ballot and they came from all different backgrounds speaks to this belief in Chicago that kind of anybody can be our mayor. And that wasn't always the case, but now a feeling that, hey, anybody could be mayor, and why not me? And I think I was really struck by that passion, because Chicago is, if it's nothing else, it's a passionate place. I think you probably found that out in your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one other thing about the Board of Elections, you know, scene, but also just process, it's like, it's the sport of it, the gamesmanship, the learning the rules part, just so you know how to exploit them. It's like, it's not like so you know what to do. It's like, it's so you know how to, you learn the rules so you know how to game the system. And which that feels uniquely, well, maybe not uniquely Chicago, but it's definitely Chicago. Yeah, so
It is very much.
yes. Yeah.
There's also, there's I think one of the things that really comes out is there's almost this like cartoonishness to some of it. Right? And the scene at Daly's restaurant was the one that I found myself saying like, oh my God, welcome to Chicago. Were there things that revealed themselves to you? I know that Zach, you've been in Chicago a bit longer, and Steve maybe a bit newer. Were there pieces of the city that were revealing themselves to you that changed how the film was unfolding?
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, Daly, you talked about dailies. That to me was a kind of a perfect example of why we love what we do.
Oh my God.
Because we go there again. The idea there was we had to work it to get Vallis, one of the candidates, to allow us to he was always very skittish about us being out when he was with voters, because he didn't want to look like we were his film crew, which maybe this is why he didn't win. Most candidates love the idea that people would think that you have a film crew, but not Vallis. And so we convinced him to let us go to dailies. We had seen dailies in our travels, and Bennett knew about dailies and had filmed around dailies even for this film. We loved the idea of going into dailies. And then when we heard that he was going to go there to do a meet and greet, then we were like, okay, can we do it? And we convinced them to let us do it. And of course, I think when we went in, we had no idea that Phil, his staff guy, lead man, advance man, was going to be the star of that scene, not Vallis. And Phil is just, he's a gift from the documentary gods.
Yes, he's amazing.
And just an incredible guy, an incredible passion, and incredibly funny. And so, I mean, those are the kind of moments as filmmakers. I mean, the barbershops are the same way. It's like we live for these moments where we go in expecting one kind of thing, and it turns into something else. In the white barbershop, we had no idea that most of those guys were ex-cops when we went there.
Yeah,
we found that out kind of the way you find it out when
at the end, right?
When you watch the episode.
Yeah.
It came out at the end. It was like, oh, wow.
Right.
And so, we're constantly in that process. And I don't think I've ever done a film that's more serendipitous in its approach to how we tell the story. There were so many days where Zach and I would start the day with one thing that we knew we were going to do, but we knew we were going to be out all day. We just didn't know where we were going after that. And it was something, at first it was a little unsettling, I have to say. It was like, we don't have a plan. It got to the point where we reveled in that.
Yeah. And I just want to add one thing about the Daly's restaurant scene too, is just that this unique project also afforded us opportunities to do things a little different, so that, we know the whole point is the candidate is going to the restaurant to campaign. Where, I mean, the obvious thing to do is, well, let's just focus on the candidate. But, we did it differently, where we, obviously we had a microphone on Phil, but we also put a lav mic on the waitress, so that we could kind of go back and forth between following them and focusing more on the people around the experience of the candidate being there. Whereas, most films might just focus on that candidate. We focused on, the edges of that. And, it gives a whole different dimension, a whole different, scene because of it.
That's a great point. And another thing happens in that scene that's reflective of how we approach this, which is, normally when you're doing documentaries, people will come up to you, or when you walk by, they'll be like, hey, what are you doing? And they want to talk. And a lot of times, very frequently, they're like, hey, can I be in it? And usually it's like the answer is a very nice no, because we're not making a film about you. But we try to be nice about it. But in this film, it was kind of like, sure, yeah.
What do you want to do?
Yeah, what do you want to? What do you have to say?
Yeah.
And that happened frequently. And in Daly's restaurant, the woman who sings the beautiful Christmas carol at the end, she approached us. We were sitting there eating breakfast, and she approached us and said, "What are you guys doing?" And blah blah blah. And she was wearing a Willie Wilson button, and we just thought, let's talk to her. And when we began that conversation with her, we had no idea that she was homeless. We had no idea that she was going to eventually sing a song to people in the restaurant. These were all things that she just struck us as someone who was full of life and interesting. And so she was absolutely someone we wanted to talk to.
Absolutely. It's, it seems like what you were doing is telling the story of the city, which is the people surrounding the candidates more so than the candidates themselves. And that really comes across. And I have to be honest, I didn't know. I sort of got this documentary pretty recently, and I didn't know, how quickly I could watch it, but I was just engrossed. And I think it's just seeing all those different parts all come together and understanding that connection between them. You really managed to build that connection between all these very different people. That was such a compelling thing. And then at the center of it, of course, is the candidates themselves, who almost are they're more opaque in a way.
Yeah.
And there's something really strong about the way that you lay that out. And was that a choice, or was that did you see less of the candidates opening up to you, or
no, I mean, it's interesting, some of the more front runner candidates considered front runners did not want to let us get access at all. And that didn't surprise us, because they thought, what do I have to gain from this? It isn't going to help me get elected. And then what if I say something embarrassing and I do become mayor? Then they've got this thing. So it was really hard to breach the wall of the high, the front runner candidates. But that doesn't mean they're not in our film. We showed up at events, we showed up at press conferences, we showed up at debates, and they're in there, whether they like it or not. And I feel like those are very revealing moments in the series. So we ended up concentrating more on lesser, quote unquote, candidates who interested us. There were so many, we knew there was no way we were going to follow everybody. That would be madness. But we identified candidates that struck us as really interesting, and those are the ones that we managed to embed more with. But even then, we were clear that we did not want to do a traditional documentary political campaign film. Where it's all about inside access and meetings, and we filmed some of that stuff for sure. We got some of that stuff. It's just not in the final series, because ultimately for us, this was not a political film in that way. It was about Chicago, like you said, and the politics is part of what Chicago is. It's reflective of what Chicago is. But we were much more interested in a kind of bigger view of the landscape of politics within the city than embedding you. We could have done a whole film on Amar Enya. We shot enough to do a whole film on Amar Enya. We could have done that, but we spared you that. We it could have been 8 hours long.
But instead we used the campaigns or the candidates as a vehicle to get around the city and to open other doors for us of folks who were included in the series.
You don't need to spare us from that. Actually, I felt that there are so many pieces of this that we could go so much further into. I hope you go into like a micro documentary series from some of this. But there are so many things that came up, as you were talking about the board of electors, and that idea that, there was that scene where, the objections and the candidate trying to defend against the objections coming up, and there was another woman who kind of says, well, this is the process, and this is how we have democracy, and it's such an incredible scene, because this is how we have democracy. And I think that juxtaposition really comes out so much in so many different places, and there's so much more to explore about what is it that we are even doing in terms of how we're governing, and is it actually something that's doing what we meant it to do. And I wondered, as I was watching this, obviously much has happened in the last year, And there are a number of conversations that happen in this film that I wondered if you reflected on differently over this last year. I imagine that much of this had been filmed and produced before this last summer.
Absolutely.
And I wondered if there were things that stood out to you now that seem to have a different light on them. Especially one to me was that scene about the police academy and
Yes.
turning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think the series has only become more relevant in the wake of the upheaval that's going on right now in America, because Chicago had its own trial of a police officer that was incredibly significant to this city, or at least to some people in the city. Others weren't paying attention at all. And so and the relationship to police is a part of the story that you see in this series, and it's certainly something that's front and center now in America. I don't know if you're aware, but we are completing an episode 5. We literally just locked picture creatively on it last night. And that episode focuses on Chicago basically a year after the election, and picks up with the pandemic, and then carries through the social upheaval that we're all living in right now. I mean, we shot, was it last weekend that we shot our last interview?
Yeah, maybe last Saturday, 8 days ago, or 6 days, or whatever. 9 days ago.
And it was a good one. It was a really important one. So we feel like the series, even before this episode 5, has real resonance, but with episode 5, it's even got more, because I think, what's going on in Chicago is what's going on in America. And Chicago is the birthplace of community organizing. So there's always been a kind of strong presence of activism and pushing back against authority, and in this city that's deep rooted in this city. And what we're seeing around the country, more of that now, is something that we've had for quite a while in Chicago, and you'll certainly see it on display in episode 5. But the other thing is that however kind of screwy the politics of Chicago are, we elected a person who was at 2.8% in the polls a month before the election, and who was a political outsider who had never run for office. So, there's plenty in this series and plenty in this city, I think, to inspire us as well as infuriate us.
Yeah. And I think that, I think the hope is with this episode 5 as well, is that, the first 4 episodes, it's almost like context, for episode 5, and episode 5 does check in on a lot of folks that appear in the first 4 episodes, but then there's new, characters, for lack of a better term, that are introduced, and play a role in telling the story of 2020.
These must have been chaotic scenes to shoot, I imagine, this last episode.
Yeah. I mean, it was mainly me and Zach and my son Jackson, who's also a DP on this, who were out capturing all of this. And we tried to be very careful with our protocols and all of that, but we're out in the thick of it. And it was, this is such a significant moment for our country. Felt like we were doing something that was vitally important to be out there. And like Zach said, I think one of the things we hope viewers who watch the whole series will appreciate is that you'll meet people during this part of the pandemic and the aftermath that you've gotten to know before any of this hit. And it's a different way of engaging, I hope, with what's going on in Chicago, because these are people now, in a sense, as a viewer.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that last episode.
I think you'll like it. I mean, I just have this sense that you're going to like it.
I'm very curious. It's I can't imagine trying to. There must be so much emotion right now, and to get people to share exactly what they're feeling in a way that then can be shared around with the rest of us. But I thank you guys for being out there and helping people's voices be on the screen, because that is, we do need to hear exactly what people are feeling, more so than hearing what the government and those in policy are thinking that people are feeling.
Right. Right.
What they should hear.
Right.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your engagement with the series and your great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
really appreciate it.
today. I'm so excited to meet you all, and I'm excited for everyone to see the rest of the series. And I hope that you are inspired enough to go into a new series about Chicago, about some of these other strange pieces that you just started to show us.
Well, we have this fantasy that we'll just keep making this series. Like we'll just keep shooting, and someone give us the money to finish them, and we'll just keep putting out episodes.
New episodes. Yeah. Yep.
I'll watch it. You've got one.
Okay.
Right. We got one viewer.
Excellent.
Okay, well, Steve and Zach, this was great talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Viniyanka. Thank you.
Great to talk.